The entire kingdom watched in frozen silence as Prince Reynar knelt before a pale bride whose lips hadn't moved in 100 years. Her dress was damp with earth, her veil stained with time, and yet he looked at her like she was the only light in the world. The priests dared not object. The guards gripped their swords but stood still. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "Why would he marry the dead?" And the truth is a story darker than most have the courage to finish. If you're brave enough to hear it all, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments. Would you die for love? It started weeks before the wedding that never should have happened. Prince Reynar had just turned 20. The castle walls echoed with preparations for a royal union, one that would join two powerful kingdoms and keep the borderlands from tearing themselves apart. His bride-to-be, Princess Alessandra of Belmont, was everything a court could wish for. Graceful, clever, politically useful. And Reynar? Well, he was obedient until he wasn't. The weight of duty pressed hard on him. Every morning, another council. Every evening, another dinner with noble families, vying for favor. He smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, and counted the days until his own future would be signed away in gold leaf and royal ink. But it was the silence in between, those cold moments in the halls when no one was watching, that began to pull at him. He started riding alone. No guards, no heralds, just him and his horse pushing through the thick green of the northern woods. That's where it began. On a fog-heavy morning just past the split in the old stone trail, where even the birds were quiet. She stood beside a broken fountain, barefoot, hair clinging to her neck in wet strands. Her dress was simple, old-fashioned, and clung to her like it had grown from her skin. She didn't look afraid, didn't look surprised, just stared at him with eyes that felt like they remembered him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," he replied. But he came back again and again, and each time she was there. Same fountain, same silence, same eyes. She never told him her name, he never asked. Back at the palace, the wedding drew closer. Bells were tuned, invitations sent, gold threads stitched into banners that bore both royal crests. And still he rode north. One night his mother found him sitting at the end of the long banquet table, staring into an untouched goblet of wine. "You'll love her," she said. "You must." But Reynar said nothing because his heart was already buried. In a forest no one spoke of, beside a girl no one remembered, and she had just asked him something impossible. She wanted to be his bride, but only under one condition. The wedding must happen in the woods, on the full moon, at midnight, and no living soul must know. He should have walked away. The woods were thick with warnings, twisted roots that reached like fingers, crows that never stopped watching, fog that didn't lift even when the sun stood high. Every step into that forest was a step away from the world he was born to rule. And yet Prince Reynar kept riding north, past the ruined fountain, past the moss-choked statues of forgotten saints, always to her. She never told him her name, but when she smiled, something ancient moved behind her eyes. He brought her apples once. She held one for a moment, then placed it back in his hand. "I can't eat," she said softly. "Not like you." He didn't ask why. He didn't want the answer. At the castle, his absence became a problem. The king summoned him for a private audience. "You've been riding out alone too often. This is not the time for rebellion," his father said, voice low but sharp. "Alessandra is not a girl you can ignore. She is a treaty wearing a crown. You will marry her, and this talk of forests and spirits ends now." Reynar bowed. "Yes, father," then left the room and rode north again that evening. That night, the girl met him beneath a half-dead willow. She wore the same white dress, but her hair was braided now, streaked with silver that shimmered even in darkness. "I asked you something," she said. "You haven't answered." He hesitated. "Why that place? Why that night?" "Because it's the only time I can cross," she said. "The veil between my world and yours, it thins during the blood moon, just once every 100 years. His heart clenched, but his voice stayed level. "And if I marry you then I can stay with you here." It should have chilled him. It didn't. He took her hand. It was cold. He didn't care. She didn't smile. "You don't know what that vow will cost." "Say it," he said. She looked at him, long, like someone memorizing a dream before waking. Then, "You'll lose the throne, you'll lose the sun, and you may never sleep again." Reynar kissed her hand. "Say yes, anyway." The wedding to Princess Alessandra was now 2 weeks away. The court bustled with silks and candles and imported spices. But Reynar was elsewhere. He slipped away through servant tunnels, past stone courtyards and sleeping guards. Some nights he didn't return till dawn, cloak damp with mist and pine. Rumors started. A maid swore she saw him walking the northern gates, barefoot. A stable boy found his horse with a wreath of black thorns braided into its mane. And in the chapel, during morning prayers, the candles on Reynar's pew flickered out without wind. Alessandra noticed she was no fool. The prince barely looked at her. During a rehearsal, as they stood before the archbishop, Reynar flinched when she touched his arm. Later, she confronted him in the marble corridor. "Is there someone else?" Reynar didn't answer. Alessandra's face tightened. "They say you speak to things in the trees." He met her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Don't follow me. I'm your future queen." "You're not," he said, then walked away. 4 days before the official wedding, Reynar disappeared completely. The guards lied, said he was on a hunting trip. The king threw a goblet across the council table. Alessandra wept only once, then began packing. And in the forest, beneath the canopy where light barely touched the ground, Reynar stood in front of her. "I'll do it," he said. "Are you certain?" "I love you." "You love what I was," she said. "I love what you are." The girl reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It was old, tied with red string, marked with bone-carved sigils. "Then take this. You must bury it before the moon rises, in the place where no footsteps sound." "What is it?" "My veil." Reynar took it with both hands. It was heavier than it should have been. She kissed his cheek. "We marry in 3 nights. That same evening, the castle bells rang in panic. A servant girl was missing, her body found hours later outside the gates, twisted unnaturally, mouth frozen mid-scream. The coroner said she died of fright. No wounds, no poison, just terror. In the king's chamber, the royal physician whispered, "Your son, he's opened something." The king dismissed him. But that night, 5 more candles went out at the same time. In 5 separate halls, Reynar found the place just before dawn. It wasn't on any map, a clearing where birds didn't sing, where sound itself felt muted. He knelt and began to dig. The earth was soft. He didn't look inside the bundle. He buried it deep. As he stood, something shifted behind him. He turned. A figure, thin, with skin like bark, no face, no voice. It bowed to him, then vanished. He didn't sleep that night. When the palace awoke the next morning, Reynar was standing at the gates, covered in dirt, silent. The guards dared not stop him. He walked straight to the hall, past stunned courtiers, up to his father's throne. "I withdraw from the wedding," he said. "The kingdom must find another way." The king rose to strike him, but Reynar's shadow moved before he did. Alessandra fainted, and across the castle every mirror cracked at once. They met under the blood moon. The sky itself seemed to tremble that night, bloated and red, bleeding through the clouds like an open wound. The forest was wrong, too quiet. The wind didn't move, but the trees swayed. The shadows had shapes. And somewhere, deep in the belly of the woods, Reynar stood alone, holding a crown made of roots and iron nails. She was already there, not walking, not waiting, standing perfectly still beside the ruined chapel no one remembered building. Her dress hung like smoke from her bones. Her eyes shimmered like frozen water. When he stepped closer, the ground didn't crunch. Leaves curled away from his boots like they were afraid. "You came," she said. "I told you I would." She didn't smile. "It's almost time." They entered the chapel together. The altar was cracked in half. Ivy grew up the walls but didn't cross the threshold. A dozen black candles flickered without flame. And in the center of the floor, a circle drawn in ash and crushed bone. "I have no priest," Reynar whispered. "You have me." She stepped into the circle first. Her bare feet left no mark. Reynar followed. From her sleeve, she drew a knife carved from glass. "Your blood must bind us." He didn't flinch when she sliced his palm. He didn't speak when she pressed the cut to her chest. The blood vanished, and the room breathed. A sound rose from the earth. Low, ancient, older than language. The trees outside groaned. The broken windows pulsed with light. And from every dark corner of the forest, something came closer. Figures, dozens, hundreds. Some wore armor, some nothing at all. Some crawled on limbs, bent the wrong way. All of them were dead, but they stood in silence, watching, witnesses. Reynar's heart beat once. loud enough to crack the stillness. Then she spoke. I, the forgotten, the forsaken, the one who waited, take you as my anchor, as my breath, as my door. I, Reynar of Valhem, he said, voice steady, take you as my truth, as my fate, as my bride. The air collapsed. The trees shivered. The circle glowed red, then black, then disappeared. And all at once the forest bowed. The dead turned away, melted into the mist, left without sound, except one, an old man in priest's robes, no skin, no eyes, just bone. He raised his hand toward them, and from it poured a single word, bound. Then he crumbled. By dawn, the chapel was gone. Reynar walked alone out of the forest, skin pale, lips silent, eyes distant. He said nothing to the guards who spotted him at the northern ridge. He gave no answer when his chamberlain begged for an explanation. He slept for 3 days. When he woke, everything had changed. Princess Alessandra had left. Her father's army was approaching the borderlands, demanding restitution or war. The king was bedridden, fevered, muttering in sleep, surrounded by priests burning herbs no one could name. And across the city, reports poured in, windows shattered in empty homes. Children spoke languages they didn't know. A woman birthed a baby with teeth. And the cats, dozens of them, gathered in the central square, all facing the palace, unmoving, staring at the tower where Reynar slept. The archbishop refused to perform any more blessings. The bells no longer rang. When Reynar emerged, it was night again. He walked the halls like a ghost. People made way for him without knowing why. The torches near him dimmed, and on every mirror he passed, his reflection was altered, off. Too tall, eyes too deep, smiling when he wasn't. In the great hall his father waited, weak, grey, slumped on the throne like a dying branch. You've cursed us, the king rasped. I freed someone, Reynar replied. She was not meant to be freed. I was not meant to be born to you, he said quietly. And then something cracked behind the walls, a moan, low and full of earth. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the stained glass window at the top of the hall, depicting the kingdom's founder, shattered without touch. In its place, only red light poured in. That night, the bride came to the palace. No one saw her enter, but every torch in the east wing went out at once. And when the guard captain opened the prince's door to check on him, he found Reynar kneeling before her, whispering. She didn't move, she didn't breathe, but the room smelled like lilies and rot. By morning, 3 servants had vanished. The cook screamed when she opened the flour barrel and found it filled with teeth. The queen locked herself in the chapel and refused food, and the king, what remained of him, issued a decree. The prince is no longer heir. He is under house arrest. His union is annulled. The ink was still drying when the guard sent to Reynar's chamber stopped moving. They stood outside his door for 12 hours, silent, frozen. Their eyes wept blood. When the steward touched one, his fingers withered like leaves in fire. Whispers filled the court. Reynar was possessed. Reynar had wed a demon. Reynar had died in the forest, and something else had returned in his place. No one agreed, but everyone locked their doors at night. The bride appeared again on the roof of the west tower. She stood in the rain, didn't move for 3 days. Birds began slamming into the windows below her. When a priest tried to banish her, his mouth fused shut. He died choking on his rosary. Reynar wrote a letter to Alessandra. It arrived blood-stained, without a seal. She burned it before reading, but as the flames rose, the paper screamed, and the ashes curled into the shape of a crown. Something was unraveling. The walls of the palace grew colder. Whispers came from dry fountains. All paintings of past kings began to fade, and Reynar's shadow started moving on its own. He no longer ate, no longer spoke to anyone but her. But every night the bells rang once, even though no one was pulling the rope, and every night one more mirror cracked until only one remained in the prince's chamber, covered in a black veil, wrapped in roots. The mirror began to whisper. No one could say exactly when it started. Maybe it had always whispered, only now people were listening. It stood veiled in Reynar's chamber, untouched by servants, ignored by guards. Yet when they passed the door, even without entering, they heard it, low, rhythmic, a woman's voice speaking backwards, like wind dragging a lullaby through a grave. And then the deaths began, not murders, not sickness, just ending. The stable boy who found his horse chewing on its own leg. The laundress who folded a dress that hadn't been worn in a century, then drowned in an inch of water. The knight who tried to pray at the chapel but vomited black feathers until he collapsed. Eyes rolled white. Every one of them had seen something, heard something, touched something they shouldn't have. But no one said the name aloud, not hers. The king had lost control. He no longer left his room. Priests rotated in shifts, trying to purify the royal quarters. But the incense always turned to ash, midair. Scripture burned in their mouths. One lost all his teeth after uttering the phrase, "Undo the Union." Even the queen had changed. She roamed the halls with a candle and spoke only in riddles. One night she told the steward, he's her echo now, and when she breathes, he speaks. Then she walked barefoot into the fountain in the south garden. She never came out. They drained the water the next day. She wasn't there. Alessandre was dead. That was the official word. No funeral, no body. Just a letter sent from her father. You will answer for what your son has unleashed. The army massed on the border, but the kingdom didn't prepare, because the kingdom wasn't whole anymore. In the capital, the sky no longer turned fully blue. A grey mist clung to the rooftops. Milk soured within hours. Children were born with teeth too sharp, eyes too still. People began burning their mirrors, covering every reflective surface with cloth or blood. The castle was worse. Windows refused to open. Whispers came from the walls. And in the throne room, every tapestry now showed the same figure, a faceless woman in a decaying wedding dress, hand outstretched, mouth stitched shut. Reynar didn't sleep anymore. He didn't seem to need it. He would sit for hours on the edge of his bed, speaking softly to someone no one else saw. Sometimes the door to his chamber would creak open, just a finger's width, and guards would glimpse the impossible, her shadow moving on its own, brushing the wall like a stain. And once a page swore he saw the prince's back covered in writing, script that shifted, spiraled, carved itself into his skin and vanished by dawn. The advisors begged the king for action. Send him to the tower, said the general. Have the veil burned, said the bishop. But the king only whispered, he is the veil now. And then one morning he didn't wake up. They buried him without ceremony. Reynar didn't attend. He stood in the east tower, staring into the fog, lips moving silently. And when the bell told his father's death, it rang 13 times. No one pulled the rope. That night, the castle itself shifted. Stone groaned. Doors opened where there were no hinges. A hallway stretched longer than it had ever been. The steward opened the royal chapel and found it filled with water. At the center, floating, a crown. Not the king's, not the prince's. Something older, carved from bone, tied with red hair. He didn't touch it. He never spoke again. Reynar now ruled in name only, but he held no councils, signed no decrees. He simply walked from chamber to chamber, floor to floor, speaking to her, following her, sometimes whispering her name, other times screaming it into walls. The court scattered. The noble houses fled, but the gates didn't open. The guards couldn't leave. Their feet blistered when they stepped on the drawbridge, and the last one to try, Sir Colden, melted in his armor before the portcullis even rose. The city fell silent. Shops closed, churches emptied, people stayed indoors, boarding up windows with salt and bone. Dogs howled constantly, cats disappeared, and every night at the same hour a procession passed through the streets. Women in white, eyes closed, veils dragging behind them like burial shrouds. They said nothing, left no footprints, and always, always, they stopped before the palace, then turned to face the tower and smiled. Inside, Reynar began to change. His voice echoed even when he whispered. His eyes no longer reflected light, and his skin, it shimmered like something beneath it was waking up. He no longer dressed like a prince. He wore a grey robe stitched with something that wasn't thread. It moved. Sometimes the servants heard it breathing. One night a chambermaid entered his room, forced by the steward who wanted to prove the prince still obeyed orders. She returned 10 minutes later. Her hair had turned white. Her eyes were black. She placed a dead bird on the steward's desk, then walked into the fire, didn't burn, didn't scream, just vanished. Reynar stopped walking. He stayed in his room, staring at the mirror. The veil still covered it, but beneath the cloth, something pulsed. She was coming through, night by night, hour by hour. And when she crossed fully, there would be no gate, no lock, no kingdom, just her. The court finally broke. The Chancellor tried to stab Reynar during a meal. The blade never touched him. It rusted mid-air, turned to dust. The Chancellor's eyes bled for 3 days before he died. One final priest remained, an old man, blind, bent, but brave. He entered Reynar's chamber alone. He brought no weapon, no salt, just a prayer. He found the prince sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, fingers twined in her hair. The hair moved. The priest said, "She must go back." Reynar opened his eyes. "Back to where?" he asked. "She never left. She's not yours. She chose me. She's not meant for this world." Reynar smiled. "Then I'll build her another." The priest wept, left the knife on the table and walked out. The next morning his church burned from the inside. In the throne room no one sits anymore. The seat grows cold. The walls bleed once a week. And the portraits, they've changed. Now in every painting, the faceless bride sits beside Reynar, one hand on his, one finger pointing to the mirror, the last one, still veiled, still breathing, waiting. The princess died at sunrise, not in her sleep, not in her homeland, not by sword or poison. Alessandre of Belmont was found kneeling in the chapel of a distant monastery, head bowed, hands clutched around a letter she never finished reading. Her heart had stopped. Her body was untouched, but the monks who found her swore her eyes were open and black as coal. There was no autopsy, no funeral rites. They burned her body within the hour, and still, by dusk, white lilies had begun to grow through the cracks in the stone where she died. Back in Valhem, the kingdom rotted, not slowly, not in whispers. It came like a tide. The kitchens flooded with blood one morning, no source, no injuries, just every pipe and drain pouring crimson. The royal dogs devoured each other overnight. Children born that week refused to cry, and then came the silence. No birds, no bells, no music, the kind of silence that makes your ears ache, that presses on your skull like a hand that won't lift. Even time felt slower. The sun took longer to rise. Shadows clung to walls like skin. The castle was no longer a place. It was a wound. And at its center, Reynar, he spoke only to her. And she was growing stronger. No longer just a voice in the mirror. No longer a flicker behind the veil. Now at night, she stood behind him, fully formed. Her hands rested on his shoulders like ice and iron. She never blinked, never breathed, but she was there, watching, waiting. The council no longer met. The bishop had fled. The guards stood in place for days without moving. Servants followed invisible paths, their eyes milky, their feet bare. Some nights someone would scream in the halls, but the voice would sound like 3 voices layered over each other. Once a guard tried to cut out his own tongue, shouting, "She's speaking through it!" In the west wing, rot crept up the walls, not mold, not decay, something older. The stones split, and in the cracks, teeth, small, childlike, biting nothing, always smiling. Reynar didn't care. He spent every night with her. They danced in the empty throne room. He whispered her forgotten name into the walls. He wrote love letters in ash. And when he slept, if he slept, his mouth moved, murmuring her vows back to her. Then one night, he followed her. She led him out of the tower, down the spiral stairs, into the catacombs beneath the palace that no one had entered in generations. There, by torchlight, she showed him what he wasn't supposed to see. A stone circle, a shallow pit, 7 bones, long, narrow, wrapped in red cloth, and a crown, not his father's, hers, carved from obsidian and laced with hair. "This is where they buried me," she said, voice sharp as frost. 7 princes, 7 blades, 7 lies. Reynar touched the stone. "Why?" "Because I said no." "To what?" "Marriage." He stared at her. She stared back. "My name was Celine," she said. "I was queen of a land they erased. I walked before thrones had walls, before kings had names. They asked for my hand. I offered fire. They asked for obedience. I gave them storm. And they killed you." "No," she whispered. "They tried." She took his hand and placed it on the crown. The stone pulsed. He saw it all. A woman standing tall as mountains, skin kissed by sun, voice like 1,000 rivers. Cities bowed to her. Men built temples to her name, and then betrayal, ritual, binding, burial, time, darkness. until one day a prince walked into her woods, heart hollowed by duty, and said, "I do." Reynar gasped and pulled back. She stepped close, inches from him. "I never needed saving," she said. "Then why me?" "Because you offered love, and love is a stronger gate than blood." He trembled. "What happens now?" She smiled. "You become mine." The next morning, the castle ceiling cracked. A column collapsed in the library, crushing the last historian. The river turned black, and across the kingdom people began to dream of her, the faceless bride, walking through doorways that hadn't existed, asking questions no one understood, offering rings that burned to touch, and always whispering the same thing: "Where is my husband?" The capital prepared for exodus. Families fled with nothing but salt and steel. Horses refused to ride north. Fires wouldn't stay lit near the palace. And the sun refused to shine above the tower. Inside, Reynar sat alone in the throne room, the crown of Valhem at his feet, his skin pale, his voice gone, his hands now bearing symbols no one could read, each one drawn in bruises and bone. A voice echoed in the hall. "She's almost through." He looked up. There, near the great mirror, stood a man no one had seen before, tall, dressed in rags that shimmered like mirrors, eyes made of glass. "You need to undo it," the man said. Reynar stood. "I can't." "You must. She's not a monster." "No," the man agreed. "She's worse." Reynar stepped forward. "Who are you?" "I'm the one who buried her the first time." And then he vanished, leaving behind only one word scratched into the stone floor: sacrifice. That night, Reynar stood before the mirror. The veil had burned away on the other side, Celine fully visible, smiling. She raised a hand, he mirrored her, and as their fingers touched the glass, the surface didn't resist. His hand slid through, she pulled, he stepped in, and the world outside held its breath, because something else stepped out. The thing that stepped out wore Reynar's face, but it wasn't him. The eyes were wrong, too still, too deep, like wells with no bottom. The voice, when it spoke, trembled the glass in the chandeliers, and the body, it moved like something remembering how to be human. It smiled at the guards, and they wept blood. For 3 days, the kingdom held its breath. Nothing entered, nothing escaped. The castle gates vanished entirely. Just gone. Stone turned to moss, metal dissolved into vines. The walls of Valhem grew taller, darker, covered in symbols no one could decipher. The spires twisted skyward like black fingers. Inside, the staff who remained fell silent, some by fear, some by death, most by choice. They simply stopped speaking, just wandered the halls in robes stitched with dead leaves, eyes shut, whispering names that didn't belong to them. Reynar's true self, what remained, was not gone. He was inside, still inside, behind the mirror, standing in a world that looked like Valhem, but wasn't. The trees were made of bone, the sky bled light, and Celine stood with him, crowned and barefoot, her dress trailing embers as she walked. "You chose me," she said. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You did, somewhere in your bones. You remembered. I have waited centuries for a soul strong enough to love me without chains. And the others? They loved me in fear or worship or lust. You offered choice, that makes you mine." He looked around. The castle was empty here, but alive, breathing. Its windows blinked, its stones sighed. "What happens now?" he asked. "You become what I was," she said, "in the world above." The false prince ruled. He sat on the throne of ash. Every sunrise turned grey in his presence. Every order he gave sounded like a command from beneath water. But the people obeyed. They had no choice. Their dreams no longer belonged to them. Then something unexpected, a sound, a child crying, the first in months. Born to a mute girl in the ruined bakery quarter. The baby had no shadow, but it screamed, and that sound echoed all the way to the tower. The false prince turned. Celine turned too, in the mirror realm, and Reynar saw her blink for the first time. "You didn't expect that," he said. She said nothing. He stepped back. "You're not invincible." Still, she said nothing, and for the first time she looked afraid. That night, Reynar found the crack, a seam in the mirror world, a shimmer in the floor beneath the ancient chapel. He pressed his fingers to it. It burned. but it opened, revealing a room older than the palace, older than the kingdom. At its center, a stone table, and on it a blade, black, twisting, alive, bound in chains of light. He heard a voice. Not Celine's, older. Only by blood, given freely, can the gate be closed. He knew what it meant. He knew what it demanded. Above, Celine grew restless. She paced. She spoke in tongues. The false prince grew quiet, cold, still. People began to notice. Something was cracking. Something was pulling. The veil between worlds had stretched too thin. Reynar returned to her with the blade. She saw it and recoiled. "You won't," she said. "I must. You love me. I still do. That love made me. I know. But it will unmake you." "I know," she screamed. The castle shattered. Above, the real world trembled. Earthquakes split the capital. Windows exploded. The sky turned black at midday, but Reynar did not stop. He drove the blade into his own heart, and in doing so, cracked the mirror. Celine howled. The mirror burst. Light flooded both realms. The false prince collapsed into dust. The castle shook. Walls fell. Towers crumbled. And across the land, the veil lifted. People remembered who they were. The dead returned to the earth. The silence broke. Reynar was found at dawn, naked, breathing, alive. His hair had turned white. His hands were burned with runes. He said nothing, but in his eyes was peace and grief. Celine was gone. Her name was erased from every book. Every mirror repaired itself. The kingdom began to rebuild, but something remained. A whisper in the east wing, a chill in the bone garden, and one final message scrawled in charcoal on the chapel wall. "Love me once, and I'll wait forever." Years passed. And yet some say time itself never moved quite the same after that night. Valhem was rebuilt stone by stone. The shattered towers were raised again, but the new architects refused to use mirrors. Glass was outlawed in all forms. Even puddles were avoided. People walked with heads down, whispered prayers before entering halls. And the chapel where Reynar bled his soul into a blade was sealed with iron and buried beneath fresh gardens. But no one forgot, especially not the king. For Reynar had survived, but he was not the man he'd been. He took the throne without ceremony. No coronation, no crown. He wore simple grey, spoke little, signed laws with a trembling hand that never stopped shaking. He ruled fairly, gently, but with a distance that made even his closest advisors uneasy. At council meetings, he often stared into the air, as if listening to someone no one else could hear. He never remarried, never laughed, and never once left the castle. People loved him, but feared him. For at night, the lights in the tower still flickered on their own, and once a year, on the night of the blood moon, the palace closed its gates. No one entered, no one left, and the king disappeared, only to reappear at dawn, barefoot, pale, lips chapped as if from prayer or frostbite. He'd say nothing of where he went, and no one dared ask. The people whispered legends, that Celine still wandered the forests, waiting, that she lived beneath the palace in the roots, that the veil had only thinned, not broken, and that the king in his quiet had never stopped loving her. Then came the year of drought. Crops failed. Lakes shrank. Babies were born silent. The priests begged for a solution. The nobles demanded a war against the southern kingdoms to seize their harvests. But Reynar refused. He walked out into the courtyard, alone, under the sun that no longer burned, and spoke to the sky. He said only one word, her name, and that night it rained for a week, and nothing he ever said afterward explained it. As he aged, the people noticed something strange. He didn't. His hair was white, yes, but his skin never withered, his back never hunched, his voice never cracked. Some said he had been granted eternity as part of the price. Others whispered, "He's still half there, one hand in this world, one hand in hers." He wrote letters, dozens, all sealed in red wax, never delivered, locked in a box beneath his bed. They were found decades later, long after his death. Each one began the same way, "My queen." When he died, there was no body, only his robe, folded neatly on the throne, a ring beside it, black stone humming with warmth. and on the window behind him a handprint, small, feminine, pressed in frost, though it was midsummer. Today the kingdom is free, prosperous, joyful, but every so often a child is born with grey eyes and a voice that sounds older than its years. Every so often someone walking the forest near the old ruins claims to see a woman in white, barefoot, watching. And in the east tower of the rebuilt palace, sealed to all but one, there still hangs a mirror, veiled, breathing,